Hey folks, welcome to another Triple T Thursday. For those just joining us, that's tools, tips, and talk, where we'll discuss info for the knife maker. In today's episode, we're going to continue our beginner series and talk all about bevel grinding. So grinding your bevels on a knife. Before we jump in, there's a bunch of things we got to talk about, like edge geometry, belts and the different kinds of belts, preparation, and a whole bunch of other topics, not just about grinding. We're going to get there though. This will be a long one, so buckle up. Let's go take a look. So here's our knife from last time, all nice and flat, ready to put some bevels on it. But before we jump over to the grinder, we better talk about edge geometry. So what is edge geometry? That's just a definition of the different kinds of grinds you can put on a knife and why. So I'm going to describe these for you, and they are really in order of kind of beginner to not beginner. And I'll explain why. So this is what we call a full flat grind. The bevel goes, the primary bevel, okay, that's the one we're going to be putting in. This one down here, if you can see that, is just the sharpening bevel, which you'll notice is a different angle than the primary bevel. So this is a full flat grind. That's probably close to what we're going to be doing on this knife. Why do I put a full flat grind as opposed to a partial flat grind? Just that most people have a tendency, as they're trying to get these balanced, these things tend to climb up and a lot of people end up with a full flat grind. So this one is actually easier to do. Next is a partial flat grind, or also known as a saber grind, just where your bevels come up part way. Still has a secondary bevel. These two very common grinds. So we'll probably do a combination or kind of a really high saber grind. On this one, this is a hollow grind or a concave grind, where you do this with a wheel. The nice thing about this one is it puts very little steel behind the edge, but these can tend to be not as sturdy as these kind of blades. You can just see how much steel is at the edge here. This is a convex grind, so you'll notice it as the opposite of this one. It bevels, it bulges out here. This puts more meat behind the edge. This is typical in something like a katana, actually, and typically the last three will not have a secondary bevel. It will be sharpened all the way down to the tip. So that's what makes these a little more complex. Next would be a chisel grind, and this whole thing, you know, to sharpen this blade, you're basically sharpening this whole bevel. Okay, this is common in some culinary knives. Typically, Japanese culinary knives have this type of grind. It also makes the knife either left-handed or right-handed, because you're really only cutting on one side, and typically what you're cutting is on this side of the knife, because it will, if you try to cut something on this side, your knife will tend to slide out. Lastly is what we call a Scandi grind, or a Scandinavian grind, where similar to the chisel grind, but this is the whole, it's beveled right to a point here. So the tough part of this is to sharpen this, you really are sharpening this entire bevel here and here. So not something you want if you need to sharpen it out in the field. So we're going to be staying away from these four, and we're going to be focusing on these. All right, so let's talk about belts. I'm going to be referring to 2x72 belts, but really this can be applied to any belt size and shape. So first off, we're going to talk about grit, composition, and backing. So first thing is the low grit belts. Okay, so these are 36s. They're just two different brands. One's really worn, one's brand new. They're different colors just because they come from different manufacturers. These are 36 grit belts. These are 120 grit. Basically, what you're looking for when you're buying belts, I recommend from 120 grit down to 36, get ceramic belts. Ceramic belts are just going to last longer, and that's what you want for heavy grinding, especially on the 36s. So these are all going to be your ceramic belts. Okay, so this is a Norton, this is a VSM, this is a VSM, and this is a Norton. So they're just different colors depending on kind of the range and the type of belt that they are. Okay, then we'll move on to when you get higher than 120 grit, you'll typically move up to aluminum oxide belts. And that's what this is. This is a 400 grit belt. You can see it's much finer. Other options, this is VSM's compact grain belt. It's for higher grits. I think this is a 600. And then we get into what I'll consider the specialty belts. Okay, so this is a structured abrasive belt. You can see there's little diamonds on here. We'll get into the usage of this one when we go to sharpening. But I like these because they're great for bevels as well. They have a very stiff backing, and we'll talk about backing in a second. Some other specialty belts. This is a surface conditioning belt. I would caution you on this one. Some new knife makers think that this is the best thing ever and it solves all their problems. This introduces some new problems. This will tend to, since it's so soft, this will tend to wash out all your lines. It's great for doing chef knives and things that don't have plunges and lines, but anything that does, not necessarily a good idea. Lastly, this is actually a leather belt we'll use for stropping. We'll talk about those when we get to sharpening. So let's talk about the backing. So let's go back to these belts. You'll notice the backing on these is very, very thick. Okay, so they're not very flexible. Okay, they're not great for doing contours. These are great for doing bevels. That's what they're meant for. Same with these. These are really thick. So these are Y weight belts. So the letter Y means thick, kind of polyester backing, not very flexible. This one is a X weight belt, so it's a little more flexible than these, but it's not still super flexible. Like I can bend it with my hand, but it doesn't kind of fold over on its own. Most of these, this one is probably a Y weight, but most of these would be considered the X weights. The last one, which I actually don't have on hand, is a J belt. And a J belt is really great for doing handle contours. They're super flexible. They're great for going around curves. And you can actually hang them off the platen and curve them really well. I just don't use them that often for doing contours. I don't know why. It's just not part of my regular regiment. So Y weight, X weight, and then the J weight belts. So as your grits increase from 36, 120 all the way up to 200 to 400, you will actually generate more heat on your workpiece. That's because there's actually more surface area in contact with the blade, where these have like sharp peaks, and that's the only thing contacting the blade. When you get to something like this, there's a lot contacting the blade, so it'll get hot quickly. So you need to ideally slow your grinder down if you have a grinder that'll slow, that you can set the speed, a variable speed grinder. If your grinder has just one speed, honestly, stick to the low grit belts. The max I would suggest you do is maybe up to 120. Now you'll notice that I go my grit progression, and this is not for everybody, but my grit progression is from 36 all the way up to 120. Some people will put a 60 or an 80 in the middle. Some people will use a 60 and an 80 in the middle. I just find I can go from 36, I'll spend a little more time on the 120, and then I don't need to stock another belt, which is just something else to pay for. Of course, I'm going to go through 120s a lot more, but it works for me. One thing I like to tell beginners is learn when to quit. Meaning, it's much harder to grind when you get up into the higher grit belts. It's easier to make a mistake. So typically, don't be afraid to just end at 36. It means you're going to have more hand sanding to do, but between a couple hours more hand sanding or ruining a blade when you're starting, you might want to just end here until you get better at grinding. Then you can move up the grits and have less hand sanding to do. So we're almost ready to grind. The next step we need to do is some preparation. We need to put some layout lines on our knife. Grinding without layout lines, scribe lines, is like driving in the dark with no headlights. You just don't know where you're going. So we're going to put some layout fluid. This is blue Dykem. It just happens to be in one of these pens. We're going to put this on the edge because we're going to want a layout line in the center here to know when we've ground to the center, because we don't want our bevel off on either side. We want it centered. Next, we're just going to paint the side of the knife on both sides. These are really great, by the way, because you can just use it like a highlighter almost, and it dries really quickly. This is the blue Dykem that's in that pen, by the way. All of this stuff that I'm about to talk about, as always, down in the video description you'll find a link to my Amazon store where you can find all of this stuff. So I wait for this to dry. Now we're going to scribe our line here. So let's talk about scribes. So there's a couple different ways to do this. First is the lowest tech route. You get a drill bit that's about the same thickness as the width of your steel. Then you can just put this down, put your drill bit, and do this. And that will, since it's got a tip on it, it will mark a line there. Then you need to flip it over, do the other side, because if this is slightly off, you'll get two lines, and you're just going to go in the middle. So let's talk about a surface plate. You need something flat in order to put this down on. What I'm using is a granite surface plate. Okay, but if you don't have one of these, and they are kind of expensive, I think this one was around $100. It's a 1.5 to 2 inch thick surface plate. If you don't have one of these, go to your local hardware store, get yourself a 12 by 24 ceramic tile. That's what this is. They're very flat. This will do you quite well. You don't really need anything this flat. So drill bit will work. Some other scribes. This one is just a height scribe. You adjust this. You can move this up and down. You do have to play with it a little bit to get it kind of near the center, and then again you're going to do both to get two lines. Lastly, this is a centerline scribe. They're a little bit trickier to use, but you basically are going to put some pressure here so that's riding on the bearings, and because the scribe is in the center of the two bearings, it doesn't matter how thick your steel is, it's going to put one line exactly in the center. The nice part about this is if your blade, in the future you had a distal taper, which means it tapers towards the tip, this will put a line no matter what the thickness is. So if the thickness changes, this will put a line down the center. Whereas if you put this down and it tapered and you did this, you'd have a crooked line. So we'll just use this one. There's our line. Some people, because we're going to be doing our pre-heat treat bevels, so we're going to be keeping the edge about the thickness of a dime or maybe a nickel. So we're going to be keeping it pretty thick because we don't want this to warp and heat treat. Some people, for that reason, don't like just a center line. They like two lines, so they can grind to a line on one side and a line on this side. I don't care. I like this. So next we got to figure out how high up we want our bevel to go. So on this knife, what we're going to shoot for is a bevel that kind of maybe goes up to this point. It's going to come down here. It's going to be the height from here to here all the way down. So it'll look something like this. I'm going to mark it just with a marker so you guys can see it a little easier. It's going to be something like this. Okay, the bevel. And then here you're going to have a little curve and it's going to come down like that. Okay. So that's what we're going to aim for. And I'm going to draw it on this side the same way, but what I always tell people, you will have a tendency to go higher than that. So what I'll tell you is shoot for something pre-heat treat that's at least a 1/4 inch below that. So that's your no-fly zone. Don't go past this line because you're going to be widening this after heat treat. You're going to be working on grinding some more. But also if you tend to, you're going to make some oopses and then you're going to push this higher and higher. So don't go over this line and then maybe you will reach that one. So lastly, what I like to do is also put a line right here, which is also one of those no-fly zones. And that's going to mark, don't go past this line when I'm grinding my bevel. So that's going to be my ricasso. Okay, here. Okay, after heat treat, we're probably going to push this out a little bit. But if we do it now, you might have a tendency to go off the edge, and that's bad. You need an unsharpened section here for a full tang knife like this so that the user doesn't cut their hand right here. So this, you want full thickness. You don't want your bevel to creep over here. So we're going to keep... You see how far, I'll zoom in on this. You see how far away I have this. I'll probably get closer later on. We're ready to talk about grinding. So if you're looking for abrasives, scribes, anything to do with knife making, check out Maritime Knife Supply. They'll get you all hooked up with everything you need. So here we are at the grinder. We're ready to start our grinding, but first we're going to just talk about basics. We're going to be grinding with the rest. And the reason I think that's the best way to learn is it takes one axis out of the equation. This lets you put the knife on the rest and you really can concentrate on moving it back and forth and applying pressure. You don't have to worry about the belt moving your piece up and down and maintaining angles like this and what the belt is going to do to your workpiece. Okay, you really just have to think about your knife on the rest, pressure, and moving it back and forth. So next thing that a lot of people overlook is attitude. That makes a big deal because sometimes you're just not in the right headspace to grind. If you're afraid of the grinder, the sparks freak you out, you need to get over that. You will get better at grinding just by getting over those issues. Come to the grinder with a positive attitude and believe that you can do it and you will grind better. Next is posture. So our posture is going to be very almost rigid, elbows at our sides in. We're moving with our body more than our hands. Okay, certainly not moving with the wrists and pivoting like this. It's much easier if you're moving your whole body, or the more rigid your body is, the better you're going to do. The next is approach, how you approach the belt. Okay, I'm 6'2", I'm really tall. So it's easy for me to be standing over the grinder and looking down the belt. Okay, if you can't do that, lower your grinder. Okay, you need to be able to look down the belt, because if you don't see, am I coming at it like this angle? Am I coming at it like this? You need to be able to see the bevel by looking down the belt. If you're standing out here trying to put the belt, put the knife up to the belt, you have no idea what angle you're coming in at. You have to be looking down the belt from above. Okay, that is a key point. If you're not doing that, you're going to fail. The basics of what we're going to do is, first, whatever the angle we approach at, we're not going to make it too steep, but the number actually doesn't matter. We're going to basically come in and try to keep it at one angle. I got my arms locked. I'm going to put the blade up and I'm just going to move down the blade. Okay? I'm taking the blade, I'm really trying to keep it flat against the platen. Not like this, not like this, but really flat against the platen. And I'm going to just put that first flat spot or facet in the bevel, okay? It's important that with this, you're just going to do one motion, okay? We'll get into other techniques. Once you create that flat spot, that is the beginning of everything. You're going to keep going until you get that one nice facet. And that's why it's important that you're looking down the belt. You're trying to put that there until you get that maybe 3/8, half an inch wide. And what that's going to let you do is it's going to want to sit on that flat spot after that. So if you turn the belt off, press up against the belt, you're going to be able to just leave it there and it's going to want to just sit on that flat spot. That's our first goal. So let's get that done and I'll show you. I've got this set up with a used belt. Okay, the reason being is if you do this with a new belt, the sharpness of this part of the blade will just strip off all your abrasives. So you're much better just doing this part with a used belt. So I've got my rest tightened, I've got the belt. Right now is just perfectly flush with the side of the platen. And the belt is as close to the platen as the rest as I can get it without actually hitting it. Okay, so now I'm going to have mine set up going about 70%.
Notice here how I'm just going back and forth. I'm not changing the angle. I'm keeping my body very stiff and just trying to keep going and put this flat spot in.
Now you see we have a flat spot here. And if I put this up to the belt, you'll notice that it wants to just stay there. No matter what I do, if I press in the middle of that area with my thumb, it just sits there. That's great, that's what we want. So now what we're going to do is manipulate this facet by just changing the pressure point. We're always going to be pushing with our thumb in the center of the belt. So we're going to change our technique a little bit from moving our whole body. We're going to be pulling with one hand and pushing with the other. Because I'm doing this bevel of the knife and the handle's on this side, this hand, my left hand, is going to be the push hand, okay? And my right hand with the handle is going to be the pull hand. The only thing the pull hand does is pull the knife or push the knife back and forth, okay? That's all it's doing. It's not applying any pressure towards the belt. That's what this hand is for. So your thumb is going to push in the middle of the belt, right where the flat spot is, okay, to get it to sit there. If we want to move the bevel up the blade, okay, or down the blade in this case, when we're holding it in this orientation, we're going to move our thumb down a little bit. I'm going to take you over to the table and just explain this a little bit. So right now our knife looks something like this. Okay, probably not exact proportions, but you get the idea. We've got a flat spot and the rest of it is basically rectangular. So by pushing, and like the belt would be right here, okay? So if we move our thumb down, what that's going to do is change this angle that this knife is up against the belt. So instead of being like this, let's say we put it up against like this. By pushing this, we're going to take this whole section off the blade. And that will, you can see it's moving the bevel down. So just by changing where you put your thumb and moving it down, it's pushing that bevel. We're still keeping a whole flat surface. We don't want to just nip this piece off. We're basically going to take this and it's slowly going to do that. As you move your finger down, and this will take a lot of iterations, but we're going to take steel off like this. Okay, not take this off, then take that off, then take that off, and then take that off. We don't want a bunch of facets. We're going to do it in one big sweeping, one motion, and keep this always flat. Okay, so we're back at the grinder. Now for this portion, I'm moving to a new belt. This is where you want nice, crisp lines. You can only really do that with a fresh belt. This belt actually isn't brand new, but it's very fresh, and there's lots of abrasive still on it, so we're going to use this. Also, we need to talk about this curve here. That curve is directly related to how much of the belt is hanging off the side. My general rule of thumb is I will hang the belt off the same width as the blade. So what I do is I'll start it up, I'll use whatever adjustment you have to track the belt, track it off this so that about the width of the belt, width of the blade rather, you can see on this side. It can be a little wider. The more it hangs off, the softer this curve.
I start by holding the knife very gently against the platen. You can see I let go here just to prove to you that it's sitting on the flat spot. Notice the technique change here. My thumb is stationed always in the middle of the platen. I'm dragging the knife back and forth and applying constant pressure where my thumb is. Now I've moved my thumb ever so slightly down the blade. That's going to widen that bevel in the direction that my thumb goes. As long as you maintain your approach angle, stay on the flat spot, and move your finger down to apply pressure, you will maintain a nice flat bevel, a nice flat facet along the edge of the knife.
So there we go. We got a nice flat bevel. You can see there's a little bit, but that's because we have 36 grit scratches here. But it's pretty much the height that I want. Now we got to go to the other side. You're always going to be better with one hand over the other. So exactly the same thing, repeat the same process. Sometimes you would typically grind the flat spot with the other belt, so you don't have to change belts multiple times, but I forgot. And we're just going to repeat that on the other side. You'll notice when I was grinding that when I first started, I put my thumb up against there and I actually let go. And that's an important learning tool. When you're doing this, go slowly up to the belt. Once you got it on the flat spot, let go of the handle. And you'll see that your finger pressure, and you can put almost zero pressure, so it's just kind of riding there. You'll see that it wants to sit there. And that's a really good test. If you're coming in at the wrong angle, when you come in, kind of let go of the knife and then let your thumb put it in the right place. And then you can start pulling. And when I was teaching a recent class, I could see the light go on when I told the student that, hey, as soon as you go up to the platen with the knife, let go on your pull hand. And you'll see that it immediately flattens out. Then you can start pulling. The other thing is be careful where you start. Don't always start at this edge. Okay, I like to start in the middle and then bounce in and go to the tip. You don't always have to start here, and that will give what's called smileys, where this comes up really high and then it comes down, so it looks like you got a happy face here. And that's really because people are always starting here. So either start in the middle and go both ways, or start in different places. So you don't always want to start here, because as you touch this, they're applying pressure here, and that's making this part of the bevel go up higher.
This actually was a bit awkward because I had the camera in the way, but I'll move the camera after this. Remember, folks, at the end of this series, I'm going to be giving this knife away to one of my Patreon members. So the link is at the bottom. Go join my Patreon. You might win this knife. Now I've got enough of a flat spot, I'm going to change techniques to moving the knife and keeping my thumb stationary. I'm also going to switch back to the new belt. There are also times as you approach the tip of the knife, sometimes it's just uncomfortable or you can't get your thumb low enough, and that's when I'll do a combination of the two techniques. You'll notice I'm also constantly checking the bevels on both sides because I want those to match in height and depth and everything. I pretty much have these all matching on both sides, so I'm done this section of the grinding.
Okay, so here's our knife with our pre-heat treat bevels. If I look on the edge here, I'll zoom in on this a little bit, you can see that I can still see my line, and I see as much blue on either side. Okay, that's important. Also, other things I'm looking for is symmetry. I want to make sure that the plunge on this side pretty much comes to the same point. I see it's off by a tiny little bit right here, but it's not too bad. It's certainly close enough for pre-heat treat grinds. I want to make sure that my grinds come up the same height on both sides. So we're at about 7/8 of an inch and about 7/8 of an inch. The other thing you can do to check is kind of look down the blade and then flip it back and forth, and just to check. And I'm also checking that the two bevels right here, this point and this point, match between the two. So why is all this important right now? It's just preheat treat bevels. If you take off more steel on one side than the other, or it was dished more here than say out here, that's the #1 cause of your blade to warp in the quench. Okay? Because if there's more steel on one side than the other, it's gonna move. And so we want a perfectly symmetrical blade so that we don't have any warping issues. Okay, and of course we want our bevels to look nice. So that is bevel grinding basics. We're going to revisit this topic after heat treat. When we do final grinding, we'll talk about more of this in that episode. Next episode, all about heat treat. So a lot to talk about in this topic. Definitely put your questions down in the comments at the bottom. If there's things I missed that you want to make sure I cover in the final grind episode, definitely let me know. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.